Product impoverishment. What I mean by that is, if a company has a product, produces something well received, quite expensive, and then they might think, what about bringing out something that's less expensive? I guess there are various ways of doing that, and maybe some are better than others. I don't know, something I've wondered for a while. You may know, I don't know. But I know I've read that a lot of work was done sampling for electric pianos. And I think some people decided, maybe even 10, 15 years ago, to really go for it. So they hired the space, the pianos, sampled every single note in different ways. And whilst they were at it, you may as well sample some other pianos as well. So I think a lot of time from companies was spent in getting top-class samples. So let's imagine that we have that. Back then, I think memory was an issue. We were talking about megabytes. I find that difficult to imagine now. So my thinking then is, you've done all that work, you've done the sampling. That's the Herculean task, really. And now what you've got is some files, and presumably a ROM chip and stuff which is fairly standard. And you can just multiply that in the millions for, I wouldn't say no cost, but for nothing compared to the cost of originally doing it. Okay, so maybe you've got all this with fantastic samples and you want to bring out a lesser piano. Well, I noticed with lesser pianos that they don't sound as good. The action may not be quite as good. Action's a kind of personal thing anyway. And it crossed my mind that it wouldn't cost them anything. I wouldn't have thought, could be wrong, to use their top-class samples in their lesser pianos. And then something crossed my mind. I wondered, do they actually go back and resample bad pianos? Go through all that in order to get lesser? Or, occurred to me more likely, do they use what they've got, their top-class samples, and impoverish them in some way? I'm not saying wrong or right. Just wondered, it seems to me easier. You could just run it through a program and it would deteriorate the sound somewhat. So with producing a lesser model then, I like the idea that leaves its core utility alone. So with the pianos, the core things for me are mostly the sound and the feel. I realise that the feel might be quite expensive to engineer, but you've got the tools set up already. But anyway, the sound, I don't know, I imagine once you've got it, you've got it. Things like perhaps the solidity you might reduce. That's not the core thing. Obviously, if it falls apart, it's no good, but the core thing is it good to play and does it sound great? So maybe limit the number of sounds, limit this, that and the other, but leave the core thing alone is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it might be to leave lots of options and all sorts of things. Obviously, the build would have to be lighter because you can't get away from physical, it seems to me. And you still include lots and lots of things, but none of them sound any good, really. So personally, I'd rather have, if I was going to get a cheaper model, far fewer options, the core stuff, and that is there. Maybe it's not as tough as the other one, so let's say it's gig-worthy, but not road-worthy, perhaps. So I thought I spotted a couple of things, and I thought I'll show them to you regarding this, and see what you think. This is a Pentax S1A camera from 1963, which I picked up for pence in a kind of junk shop. I must say, fantastically made. Scarcely any play in anything that's other than the direction it's meant to turn. It needs a service because the mirror, which flips up, has stayed up, I'm pretty sure, due to the foam. What is it with foam in my life? Microphone foam rotting, camera foam rots. It's sticky, so the mirror's stuck up there. But the shutter works. But you don't get the of the mirror. Extremely well made. This S1A was brought out as a consumer level of some higher level cameras, which came out in 57, I think, and this came out in 63. So if you like, it's been impoverished. How have they done that? One of the things is they've removed the self-timer. Whether the mechanism is still there underneath, if it was, I don't know. But there's no self-timer. The reason I'm saying that is because of this. Also, which way up for you? That way. Also, on the shutter speeds, I don't know if you can see, the top speed of one thousandth of a second is gone, and the top speed on this is 1/500th. However, if I turn the dial, I don't know if you can see the indicator line there. There's actually another click stop there. That's the 500. And if I turn it one more time, there's a click stop with no marking. And if I turn it again, it starts again on its cycle, and it's on B, I believe. What's that about then? Well, here's the 1/500th. And here's the next one. You won't be able to hear anything, but you can tell it works. Yes, indeed. What it is 1/1000th of a second, but not marked. What's that about then? Well, I think that it's cheaper to use the same shutter and not mark it than to redesign a shutter. If you couldn't disable the top one, you could have disabled it by not allowing that to turn, but they didn't bother. So yes, the same shutter. It's just that they haven't put the indication for the higher speed there. The self-timer, I would imagine, if, and I don't know at all, but if the self-timer was integral to the shutter and it meant building a new shutter to be rid of the self-timer, then all you need to do is not have a button. I don't know if that's the case with this, but so you might say this camera is impoverished, but the core utility is the same. It will take just as good a photograph. You're limited, and if it's a very bright light, you haven't got that fast speed, but then you could adjust the iris. If you're really stuffed, we're talking about one stop. You could use a neutral density filter. There are ways around it, but the core integrity and the utility of it is there, that the pictures are going to be just as good. Not having a self-timer, well, you haven't got a self-timer. You could get, it's threaded, one of those long things with a bulb, and it activates the shutter. You can hide it. So there's ways around that even. So I think that's fair. I like that. That you don't want the extra features. They make it plain what you're getting, even though you're getting more with this one, because for whatever reason. But the actual job it does is good, but you've got less options. So that's quite a nice way of impoverishing something, I think. Now, this isn't strictly the same, but I offer it to you nonetheless. Two lovely Sennheiser microphones, the Dynamic 945 and the Condenser 965. So this isn't meant to be a lesser version of this. They do have a lesser version, actually, which I'll review at some stage. This is a completely different microphone, but it's kind of high up in their dynamic range. And this is the top, I think, of their condenser range. But nonetheless, I noticed something, and this just might be sample variation or because I made it different times. But I noticed that this one has got a certain something about it that this one doesn't, even though it's very good. And I wondered, what is that? So let me zoom in. The two Sennheisers. I'm in the kitchen on the SR40V, so forgive the background noises. The grills, very similar from what I could see. The band going round the grill, very similar. One of them with a legend, the other without. You can see already that the two bodies, not so much now, but the two bodies are not quite the same. Interestingly, the text isn't either. If you look at the 9, well, the numbers, everything on the right hand, the 965 is a bit thinner, or you might say finer. Looking at the barrels, you can see a difference. The 65 certainly feels silkier. There's something about it. Difficult to tell just by looking. The threads on the grills are fine on both of them, very, very good. So in a very subtle way, apart from there's the size and the weight, just a little bit more. And this just makes you think premium. So obviously they're not comparable really, but there's an idea that, again, I don't mind. If you're going to make a lesser product, then maybe don't buff it so much, maybe don't do whatever, but the core functionality is still there. So don't compromise that. Find other compromises. I don't know, that's why I kind of like it. G&L Guitars, George and Leo. It's the last company that Leo Fender had before he died. And they have two ranges. There's the American range, and then not so long ago they brought out Far Eastern, Indonesia or Malaysia, I think, to start with. Rather like Fender a while ago did with their Squire series. So, an impoverished guitar, perhaps. Can have a little look and see if we can spot the differences. This is the Indonesian version, and the pickups are American. They send them over, apparently. All this stuff I've read, so you know. This is questionable. The bridge. Generally, it seems to be that the bridge is also American, but some people say not. Either way. The electronics, some people say are American, and some people say not. I'm pretty sure the pots aren't because they're smaller than the American. I don't know about the wiring and the rest of it, but anyway, you get the idea. But the pickups, everyone seems quite sure they're American, and the pickups are obviously a very important part. So let's see what I notice. I'm going to zoom in a minute. I'll just show you this is a 5-string, the American. It's a 5-string with a rosewood fretboard, not maple. What have I noticed? The tribute is very good. Astonishingly so. In fact, to begin with, I thought, how can they do that? Surely they must be affecting their USA sales. But then I began to notice a few things, quite subtle after a while, that not really in playability, not in the core utility, which I like, but other little things, not so important, but nice. And this is what I've noticed so far. Looking at the rear of the G&L headstock, this is the Indonesia. Looking at the tuning keys, you can see the kind of chamfer around the edge, and the metal just looks and sort of feels not so substantial. There's the blending into the neck. Looking at the American G&L, there's no chamfering. You can see the thickness of the plate. I'm not sure if the other ones are slightly hollow. These are quite substantial. Mind you, this one's 97 and the other one's a lot newer. You can see there that the blending into the neck is much smoother. It's had some attention, it seems to me. Whereas this one's sharper, which you may prefer. Looking at the necks, from tapping them, the one on the right, the American, seems brighter sounding, and to me somehow it looks denser. It's got a more interesting grain pattern. It's a slightly different colour, which is I imagine is in the varnish a tint. So try to ignore that, which brings out the grain a bit. But somehow on that one, don't know, the jury's out really, but it works perfectly well. Looking at the finishing around the contours, again, well, actually no, the back of the neck there, you can see that the angles are blended very nicely into the neck. And on this Indonesian one, it's a little bit sharper. Again, does it matter? Looking at the contours around there, and then the other horn here, you can see it's slightly more rounded. All of it looks a bit more like a, what's the phrase, a sucked sweet, they say, with the edges just, but still with some definition. And the Indonesian version is very good, but it's just a little bit firmer, a little bit sharper, which again you may prefer. Finally, a look around the front. The fretting and the fretboard very good. Very nice paint job. Again, just looking there, you can see that one's more rounded on the radius. Rosewood fretboard on this one, and again there, what looks like hand attention. Pickups. I noticed that these American ones don't have the patent thing on there, but these are earlier versions. Maybe they changed what they did. Whereas you notice on the Indonesian one, there's a patent number. I'm told that both sets of pickups are American. Looking at the bridge, it's got G&L stamped on it. I think the ones that are not American have tribute. Look at the saddles. The saddles on the American, which is older, are different. It's a 5-string, of course. It's got G&L stamped, but the saddles look like a different material. The knobs on these are slightly flattened on top, whereas on the G&L, on the Indonesian, they're domed, and I believe the shafts are a different diameter, so I'm doubting that switchgear and the knobs and so on are American. So now we come to the inspiration for this video, the Shure PG48. And I just find myself wondering, is this the best use of the planet's dwindling resources? Is this the best way of creating a slightly impoverished product? I'll leave that to you, if I may. Imagine a world, sometimes I do, where you could 3D print anything, quantum level. Yes, quantum level. So I go to bed, and before going to bed I decide I'm going to print myself somewhere a Ferrari Rosa. I wake up in the morning, and there it is. The keys as well, everything. Full tank of petrol, or gas, Americans call it, because we're talking quantum, right? Quantum level. I drive to work, and there's 10 others. Identical. Would that be a kind of impoverishment? Ooh. And if so, what exactly is the Great Siberian Itch? Be seeing you.